you don't want to take career lightly. Don't give others autonomy over the portions of your career that you can control. So that is why we're giving you these facts. This is why we're having these conversations. This is why we can continue to have these conversations on this podcast, because you need visibility. You need the facts. You need the knowledge to hold people accountable with the things that you can control to get what you deserve. And Corporate for the Culture is here to help Black professionals, right?
Hello, and welcome to Corporate for the Culture, a podcast where we dismantle the career system and provide the next generation of Black corporate leaders with tools to build the career they deserve. I'm Elizabeth. I am a Black woman feeling, my dimensions today are, I'm feeling very Jamaican, very Caribbean. I'm feeling also vulnerable. What about you, Gabrielle?
No, I love that we start every episode with this. And I think if you haven't tuned in to our kickoff episode or listened to our most recent episode, we do start every episode with our dimensions of identity. And those may shift day to day. Like you said, you're feeling real Jamaican today and vulnerable.
Probably because I had jerk chicken for lunch.
You know, if anyone knows any place in New York City to get good jerk chicken, please send me a message via our platform. But anyway, I am Gabrielle. I am co-host and co-founder with Elizabeth. I am a Black cisgendered woman. I am multiracial, but I identify as Black. I am a millennial and right now a workaholic. I've been working in consulting for the last 4 years since I graduated business school, work in human-centered design, diversity and inclusion, employee experience, behavioral interventions. Every day is exhausting. And as we all know, every day in the virtual world is exhausting, even if you're an extrovert, because all we do is talk to people. But anyway, happy to be here and talk to our listeners today.
So today what we're focused on is how we define career. So Gabrielle's given you a little bit of insight into what her career looks like today, but we want to dive into the goal of career, and the representation of Black professionals in the C-suite is really where we're focused, if you heard what I said up top. So we want to talk about why we're so invested in that and what career means to us, and, a couple of other people as well will share that information too. So let's dive into a definition. What is career? According to Indeed, career has two definitions. So the first one is used to refer to your career, your occupation, trade, or vocation. And this is really what you do for a living. The second is all of the jobs that you've held over the course of your working years, all of those titles, all of the accolades that you've earned, anything that you've accomplished during those working years makes up your career. Mm-hmm. But this sounds a little bit too limited and too formalized for me.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I really want to dive into some other definitions. We asked some Black professionals on Fishbowl, why is career important to you, to help to answer this question. So we got a range of different answers. You'll be able to see others of them on our social media, on our Instagram page. And we would love for you to share your definitions or why career is important to you as well. But I want to share 3 sentences or 3 testimonials from people about what career means to them or why it's important to them. So the first one is impact, sense of accomplishment, and contribution to society. There are a few accomplishments I look back on like, yes, I really made that happen. I really loved that quote. So what do you hear in that one?
I'm hearing sense of self, accomplishment, but really just like the impact of society.
Yeah. For me, it rings of what do I want to be remembered for? Like legacy. I really want to leave this mark, this legacy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So our second one is career does a lot for you the further up the ladder you go. Starts out as a vehicle to collect marketable skills and experiences, but over time, your ability to positively impact your firm, community, and clients increases. This is over and above providing for your family.
That's interesting. Because, yes, I would say vehicle, and we're going to talk a little bit about our own personal definitions. But this one has a lot in it. I think there's a lot to pull apart. And what I'm hearing is the more successful you are in your career, the more tangible tools, resources, branding that you have to gain more from this world. So that could be financial reward. That could be ability to drive impact within teams, be a decision maker. So that's kind of what I hear within this sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And then the last one, our last quote here is nothing. Career is literally a paycheck. Alexa, play All About the Benjamins by Notorious B.I.G.
Wow. No, that's funny. That's a good one to end with.
Yeah.
All about the money.
Career means so many different things to so many different people, but I really want to give a sense of what career means to me, and Gabrielle, for you to share with us what career means to you. So for me, career really has 3 elements to it. How you make your living. So that's that first definition from Indeed. Second one is how you contribute to society, which sounds like our second quote. Mm-hmm. And also 3, what you're known for. And for me, what you're known for is something that you can probably monetize. You hear about people having a career like a doctor or engineer or maybe a salesperson. But you've also probably heard the term career criminal. And that's someone who has committed many crimes over the course of their lifetime. And that is, to me, an indication of you can fall into a career without being intentional or directional. Maybe they intended to be a career criminal, maybe they intended to be a salesperson. But you can also find yourself in positions where you think, wow, I've been doing this for the last 15 years and I didn't really think about it at the time. I just kept getting up and going to work every day. So those are my definitions. But what about yours, Gabrielle?
So I'm just going to react to a couple of things.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I think you summarized well some of those quotes. We heard like legacy, like I did this, I contributed. I think the career criminal thing is actually something I've never heard of before.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
I probably watch too much true crime.
Yeah, I know. But then I wanted to separate that career criminal from what you were talking about in terms of deep subject matter expertise, like you've done this for 15 years or if you're a generalist. And those are paths that at a certain point in everyone's career, you're going to have to decide, right? Do you want to be a generalist across multiple different skills, abilities, or do you want to be a deep subject matter expert where you are deep in research, deep in the concept, deep in the design of a particular item? And I think that's an interesting journey that majority of people, especially I think as I'm crawling up the consulting ladder, is something that I have to define. But I like those. Yes, and, right, to evolve those a little bit further. I tend to hesitate with this word because it could be an exclusionary word. But when I think about that Notorious B.I.G. quote that you just provided and the fact that that individual was like nothing but a paycheck, when someone says that, I think of a job. I don't think of a career. How I personally distinguish the difference between a job and a career is a career provides you purpose, and purpose can be really complex. Not everyone identifies their purpose, and that's okay. But I do feel like a career is very personal. I feel like it provides you a strength to keep going. And I say that because we spend so much of our lives in our career, which I know we'll talk about a little bit later. But also when I think about why I do what I do and why I'm happy to live in my purpose of doing D&I work, living in this every day and pushing through a lot of sorrows, triumphs, is because I feel like I'm providing back for my family that I'm trying to build, because I don't want to be alone in this world personally. Like I want to be able to share my life with someone, and personally I want to bring children in the world. So like a lot of the stuff that I do is also so that I can then provide to my family. But then on top of that, when I think about why is it important to provide to my family, is because you get more return the further up you get. And that return also equates to freedom and security, because it is about the Benjamins at the end of the day. The Benjamins are a reflection of earnings. That's a reflection of recognition of talent, right? You get paid more. You're supposed to be and this is a whole different type of discussion, but right. You're supposed to be paid for your contributions. That money provides that freedom and security. So I guess in summary, I would say purpose, being able to provide for my family, my community, and then output also feeling a sense of security and freedom.
Yeah, I really like those, and I would agree with those for myself as well. Interesting, your comments around purpose, and we can get more into that later on. Something that it triggered in my mind is someone that doesn't have purpose before they start the work may not actually latch on to purpose in the work. So, it's a job that may be really impactful and really life-changing to one person may not connect in the same way for another. So that was just my thought.
That's interesting because I don't think I would say that I knew my purpose going into my job. I think I had, and what we'll talk about in terms of in our later episodes around dismantling the career system and being really strategic about career planning and development, is like experiences drive perspective. And so if you haven't experienced something that enlightens a spark in you that aligns to what I would define as a purpose, because it's this innate drive and curiosity,
right?
Then yeah, it's harder to define that. And where that happens in your life is based on the experiences that you've had and opportunities that you've had. And that's another inequitable experience for Black people, because we're kept from a lot of experiences and opportunities to be able to define our purpose. And that's why I say I hesitate on the word purpose, because it is exclusionary, because those who are able to, again, have those experiences, define those perspectives for Black people, it's limited. And I know that's not what we're here to talk about today because it's very deep.
But we are talking about some of the ways that Black people are kept out of careers. So I think that's a great transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Liz and I, when we were thinking about constructing this conversation, because the purpose of this episode in particularly is to take a step back and really help our listeners come alongside of us in our journey to understand why we're so focused on the career system and why it's important to dismantle it. But we also believe in order to be able to create leverage and tools and capabilities and navigate the system, you have to understand how we got here, right? Same conversation of why we're having these days of why it's important to teach Black history and African American history. So this portion of our episode, we're really going to just take a step back, think about the moments in history, and this is not exhaustive, right? So if you think there was pivotal moments that I have forgotten within this segment of our episode, please feel free to write us, list it on our social media, send a mail, whatever. Happy to make sure that we find space to recognize that moment in history. But there are all up, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 moments. One around black codes and the 13th Amendment, sharecropping, what we'll talk about a little bit around unskilled labor, civil rights and equal opportunity, what we have repetitive in our economic construct, recessions, and then concluding with talking about the moment that we're living now with COVID. And I'm going to talk about these very high level because I don't want to bore you too much, but I also want to enlighten you to maybe continuously do this research. So when quote unquote Black people and African Americans were given freedom and slavery was ended with the 13th Amendment, falsely assumed by many is that with freedom came behaviors and actions and policies and procedures that reinforce that freedom, which we all know is not true. And so after the 13th Amendment, when slavery ended, there was something that arose in certain states like Mississippi called Black codes. And Black codes barred Blacks from working in skilled jobs, and kept them in roles of becoming continuously being servers or farmers, and also seized any of their wages. So like we know, you need money to move around. You need it for security. You need it to to be able to take action within your own life. And so that's where we get into the concept of sharecropping. So when recently freed slaves were looking for ways to earn money and were kept and barred by things like the Black Code, one big opportunity that arose was sharecropping. And sharecropping, like it sounds, was the ability to continue the skill that they had, which was farming and being a servant, and paying white landowners to allow them to share a part of that land to create produce, products, etc. The problem with that is that these white landowners made them pay large rents. Those large rents basically, again, took away all their earnings, but it was all they knew. No one was training them on new skills. No one was training them on ways of living. So you leaned into, at least in the sharecropping, you had a place to stay. You were able to use a skill that you knew well, but unfortunately it still didn't provide them the tools and resources to really transform and excel their lives. And so this gets us into another conversation around unskilled labor. And unskilled labor is basically what we're seeing reinforced today, where Black Americans are kept and are predominantly are represented in certain types of roles. And these roles also have like low income or low recognition, however, and also have high risk. And that's something that you saw in COVID. So one thing that, when there was the Great Migration, this brought 500,000 of Black Southerners to industrial centers like Chicago, Detroit, and New York. And this is where you saw, again, that migration and securing what we called unskilled or semi-skilled factory jobs for the first time. And this was a huge transition for the Black community. However, again, it was only a certain type of labor. It wasn't anything that they could be trained up on, so they wouldn't train them to be able to express another type of skill. And so when you think about today, some of the statistics of where Black professionals lie, where we have prominent representation, is in frontline jobs that are characterized as essential. And so this is why you saw the disproportionate impact of Black Americans having COVID. We have a huge percentage in public transit. I think we make up 26%. In convenience stores and drugstores, 14%. If you think about trucking and warehouse and postal offices, we represent 18.2%. Healthcare, 17.5%. Childcare and social services, 19.3%. I will tell you that the childcare one, that's a sensitive one for me, particularly. I mean, my partner and I just talk about how tired we are seeing Black nannies taking care of white children in these streets. Like the help, it is very, very frustrating. But then we have, I just don't know why I'm very curious to understand those barriers keeping us in these types of roles and why we do what we know and what is comfortable, and then how we can better challenge those in those decision-making roles to give us more fair opportunity, right? That's what we're fighting for. And that brings us to the Civil Rights Equal Opportunity Act, which was a nice to have and has created some change. But you still see cases, even when we think about discrimination is really hard to prove in court. And so we do have a separate episode all about discrimination and how hard it is to hold people accountable. And I'm going to just talk about this last one because I know we can move on in the conversation, but recessions are a big one, right? Recessions impact those of, I would say, mid to low wage groups the hardest. And when I described earlier in terms of, I keep touching my face, sorry, but like Black Americans and the types of roles that we represent in, we always get impacted the most with recessions. COVID is not necessarily categorized as a recession, but that's what it felt like on steroids, right? And so there's something that they call first fired, last hired. this is one of the key structural obstacles facing African Americans in the labor market. One statistic is, for example, unemployment rate averaged about 3.7% in 2019. And for Black unemployment rate, it was twice as high, coming on an average of 6.1 over the year. Mm. And this is something that I'm transparently worried about with COVID, because of the fact of either we died because we were in these essential jobs. You want to call them essential, but you don't pay us like they're essential. We're the first to get fired, laid off, and then last hired back. So there was some statistic that I recently saw where when you think about the wage gap, Black women were on track within the next couple of years to potentially earn equal wage. But because of COVID and this last hire segment, it doubled in terms of the time that we could potentially have equal wage.
Wow.
That's why I'm very vocal about when I see opinion pieces, I would say, on LinkedIn or news where they are talking about the disproportionate impacts around the Black community, which is very true, but they don't talk about the resolution of how the system is going to help us re-enter the workplace, because there are so many people that are unemployed that are part of marginalized groups.
The thought around COVID for me, when we're talking about unskilled labor, and, I really hate that term as well, but it's a term that we all understand. But around unskilled labor and around being the last in, first out, especially when we're talking about a crisis like COVID, these are people that either wouldn't have had health insurance to begin with because they're not in jobs where they would have received health insurance, or if they did, they lost it when they lost that job. So that's just an additional consideration.
Yeah. And sorry, that's so true. And just to make this very real for people in terms of how high the unemployment rate is, the latest data point that I could find, Black unemployment rate was at 16.7%.
Which is high.
And Black women who lost their jobs between February and April is 18.8%.
Which is ridiculous.
Black women workers who lost their jobs between February and April, 18.8%. I haven't heard anyone talking about any type of program for reentry of the workplace. Just more about how do we make cultures of inclusion, or how do we create allies, or blah, 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 blah. But and then they want to say, oh, yeah, we want to drive our D&I slates or our representation goals, but there just isn't enough talent out there.
Yeah.
It's so limiting. People's perspectives are so limiting.
It's extremely limiting. But, this is another reason why we do what we do.
Let's talk about why this is important. I mean, we kind of trickled it in throughout, but Liz, you have some really great points outlined. So let's dive in. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so we've talked about how Black people have been kept out of having fulfilling careers and careers that they really connect with. And we've also talked about what career means, but why it matters in general. So, these are not specific to Black people or Black professionals. This is for the general population. Career matters because it's where we spend a lot of our time. So according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average person spends 40 hours a week at work. That is 1/3 of your weekday. If you work 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, I know that's not everyone's situation, but if we're talking about corporate jobs, you're probably working Monday to Friday. Those hours probably look a little bit longer. Well, if you're talking about corporate,
right, I was about to say, if you're talking about corporate jobs now, you are getting 45 to 60 hours.
Exactly. Yeah. You might be overworking the sun if you are doing corporate jobs.
Right.
So that's why you spend at least 1/3 of your time. So think about it. 8 hours asleep, probably not. You're probably streaming, so it's probably more like 5 or 6. Then 8 hours of, core working hours, and then 8 hours to yourself. But that is time that you could be doing, using to do something else. If you didn't have to pay your bills, if you didn't have to pay your rent, if you didn't have to take care of kids, things like that, you would probably be able to use that time in a wonderful other way that didn't rely on you to go somewhere that may not be your preference of places to spend your time and to be productive. So that's one piece, that it is a lot of time, a third of your time, at least. The second piece is that it's part of your identity and how you define yourself. So I'm sure that you've seen people that are introduced, or maybe you have been introduced before as, oh, this is Gabrielle, she's a consultant. Or this is Derek, he's a doctor. And that becomes one of the first things that people know about you, your name, your job. And that's how they relate to you, how they identify with you, especially if you live in a city like DC or New York. Those what do you do questions, those are some of the first. It's not the case everywhere, but definitely DC and New York. It's what do you do?
I mean, it's crazy, right? You go to these happy hours and sometimes I even get the question before my name. Or I won't even say before my name, but it's the thing that someone remembers more than your name. You know how we go in for introductions, you're like, hi, I'm so-and-so. Totally forget the name, but I could be like, oh, that person worked at so-and-so, went to what so-and-so school. And so like the one thing that Liz has heard me say 5 million times outside of your identity and how you define yourself, to summarize that, it's your self-worth. Like that's how heavy career is. I mean, it is, like there's two, I think, big elements that we've discussed around what drives self-worth, and it's your education, like where you went to school.
Yeah.
And where you work. That's how people identify your self-worth. It's cold, it's shallow, but it's the truth. It really is. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely both of those things, cold, shallow, but also the truth. So this is how people perceive you as your productive role in society. I'm sure that they, you know, if you tell them about your interests and hobbies, they may pay attention to that, but you're right. At the end of the day, they're going to be like, this is Gabrielle, the consultant. They're probably not going to be like, she likes to ice skate. I don't know if you like to ice skate.
I was about to say, do you know me? First of all, I hate being cold.
I hate being cold too.
Maybe it's because of the Olympics. Did they do ice skating? No, they didn't do ice skating this Olympic.
No, that's the Winter Olympics. So in 2 years, I think it's every 2 years.
Yeah, okay. I digress, but yeah, so it's not ice skating.
Another piece to that self-worth piece is when people retire, sometimes they lose that sense of self because they spent so many years working in HR or being an entrepreneur or whatever it is. And then when they retire, they lose that identity, and it makes such a difference to them. There are so many people that retire and sadly pass away because they've lost their purpose in life. It happens a lot. So a lot of these people are, I'm saving for retirement, I'm going to go retire, but they don't invest in other areas of their life where their identity can also live. So when they get to the end, they just think, what is there left for me? And it can send people into a depression and sadly an early grave.
Okay, first of all, I did not know that, Liz. I never thought about that. And again, this is a podcast, so no one can see my reaction or my face.
Your horrified face.
But I was like, what? I think that's what's great about this generation, though, right? It's like we're calling for more of that balance with well-being, work-life balance, having hobbies outside of a keyboard. Very interesting. Okay, I'm energized to do more than work now.
So apparently in a study of Shell Oil employees, those who retired at 55 and lived to be 65 died 37% sooner than those that retired at 65. In general, people who retire at 55 are 89% more likely to die within 10 years than those that retire at 65.
Holy shit. That's huge.
Yeah, so it doesn't mean don't retire early. What it means is make sure that you are tapped into a purpose outside of work before you retire. It's an interesting thing, but I think a lot of people are driven by a sense of responsibility at work, a sense of accomplishment at work, and that keeps them going. It really does. Work is also one of the ways that we change the world. Changing the world takes time, and a career is something that you engage in over long periods of time. So we just talked about how you can retire at 65, let's say 22 to 65 is a really long time. And that is long enough to make some really big impact, really big change, and have some really great accomplishments. So whatever it is that you are passionate about, whatever it is that you decide to do for the length of your career, you can really make some changes in the world. And then finally, this one is specific to Black professionals, but the last piece is we have a wealth gap. All of those things that Gabrielle mentioned up front about how we've been kept out of Korea have also kept us out of wealth in this country. And it's not just Korea that has done that. It's a lot of systematic racism and systematic barriers that have caused us to be way behind in terms of wealth. So this is an older study, but in 2016, the average white family had a net worth of $171,000, and the average Black family had a net worth of $17,150.
Say it again.
10 times. So the white family had $171,000, and the Black family had $17,150. So to put this into perspective for you,
I don't know if there's a perspective to put it into account. The fact that you, like the numbers, this is what's great about facts. You can't ignore facts. You can't change facts. It is what it is. So white families, annual household back in 2016 was 10 times greater.
Yeah, which even though I've seen this statistic before, because when I was doing my research, it's what I pulled down. It really just packs a punch when you put it behind everything that we've just said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do we get to that level? How do we bridge the gap? Because clearly the systems are not doing it for us. Clearly the system is not made for us to be successful. So we have to generate streams of income, and there are many different types of streams of income. But if you have no money to begin with, it's harder to make money when you don't have the money. When everything is paycheck to paycheck, when everything is, you're just living day to day, you can't necessarily use any of that money to invest in, which is what most of the other streams of income require.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So for most Black people in this country, the easiest barrier to entry in terms of wealth is getting a good job, a job with a good income. So.
Yeah. And I would also say on top of that, I don't remember the exact numbers at this time, but I had a conversation with a woman who's part of social justice CEO action group, and she focuses on those who are incarcerated and their entry back into the workplace and the workforce. And we all know that our infrastructure around incarceration is horrible. Mm-hmm. But one thing that out of many things that she said that stuck with me was redefining even the importance of a job or career to keep out of the system.
Yes.
And I think it was like 80% or something crazy, astronomical difference. Someone has a steady job and a steady income that is of means, right? So it's not like you have that minimum wage that's appropriate where you're not having to live off of food stamps and like hustling and bustling from paycheck to paycheck. There's a greater return that they will not be in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the challenges with that as well is there are so many jobs that you just can't get if you've had a felony, or you just can't get if you've had a criminal record. So many of those applications that we've all filled out ask you, have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been incarcerated? All of those things are barriers to entry. So the jobs that people like that end up in are generally those unskilled labor jobs And some of them pay a lot of money, but they also carry a lot of risk with them. So, jobs where you might be doing lots of physical labor, but also without healthcare.
I think in conclusion, this episode just scratches the surface. Hopefully listeners have gathered how passionate we are about the topic of career. And I think the understanding, it first starts with discoverability and self-awareness. And the awareness here is that if you knew as a Black person that you were kept out of certain opportunities to build a career, hopefully some of the stuff that we said provides you the facts to use in your case when you're asking for what you deserve, on why we are consistently having to work 10 times as hard, consistently given marked down in terms of the leveling that we may enter a company with, and then consistently why we don't have the outputs, the tools, the resources, the money, the bank, the Benjamins to really help us gain that security and freedom. So when I think about some of the takeaways that we've had, you don't want to take career lightly. Don't give others autonomy over the portions of your career that you can control. So that is why we're giving you these facts. This is why we're having these conversations. This is why we can continue to have these conversations on this podcast, because you need visibility. You need the facts. You need the knowledge to hold people accountable with the things that you can control to get what you deserve. And Corporate for the Culture is here to help Black professionals, right? That's what I hope this sparks in those who are listening. Hopefully you share it with others. And you come back to the table with us on this podcast to continue the conversation and the dialogue, and provide us more insights in terms of what you're going through and what you're dealing with and where we could support you in our conversations.
Absolutely. Well said.
Oh, thank you. So again, we, Elizabeth and I, represent Corporate for the Culture, a podcast where we dismantle the career system to provide the next generation of Black corporate leaders with tools to build the career they deserve. So check out our social media. We're on Instagram. We have a LinkedIn page. We're about to launch a YouTube, I think.
Yeah.
And you can subscribe and listen to anywhere that you listen to podcasts. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, everyone. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.